The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the fresh mound of earth, baking the clay soil until it cracked like broken pottery. Sarah McKenna's wrists burned against the rough hemp rope that bound her to the crude wooden cross marking her husband's grave. 3 days had passed since Lieutenant James McKenna fell defending Fort Richardson, and now she knelt where they'd buried him, her calico dress torn and stained with dust and blood. The Comanche war party had struck at dawn, their war cries echoing across the prairie like the screams of hunting hawks. Sarah had watched from the fort's window as James rallied his men, his saber flashing in the morning light before a lance found its mark between his ribs. The image burned behind her eyelids now, his blue eyes going wide with surprise, then empty as he crumpled to the dusty ground. Sergeant Mills had been the one to tie her here after the Comanche retreated with their captives. "An eye for an eye," he'd growled, his weathered face twisted with grief and rage. "They took our boys. Now they can watch their prize rot in the sun." The other soldiers had nodded grimly, their own losses too fresh, too raw for mercy. Sarah's throat felt like sandpaper. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust. Vultures circled overhead, their shadows dancing across the cemetery's scattered graves. She'd stopped struggling against the ropes hours ago, conserving what little strength remained in her parched body. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her lift her head. A lone rider emerged from the heat shimmer, his paint horse moving with the fluid grace of wind across water. The warrior sat straight-backed in his saddle, his long black hair braided with strips of leather and adorned with eagle feathers. War paint streaked his bronze face in bold strokes of red and black, and a necklace of bear claws rested against his bare chest. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as he dismounted 20 feet away, his moccasined feet silent on the hard-packed earth. He was tall and lean, with the corded muscles of a man who'd spent his life on horseback and in battle. A tomahawk hung from his belt beside a knife with an elk-horn handle, and a Winchester rifle rested in the crook of his arm. She waited for the killing blow, for the scalping knife to flash in the dying light. Instead, the warrior gathered dried buffalo chips and mesquite branches, building a small fire just beyond the reach of her outstretched legs. The flames caught and danced, casting flickering shadows across his impassive features. Then he sat down cross-legged beside the fire, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the crackling of burning wood and the distant howl of a coyote. Sarah's mouth was so dry she could barely swallow, but she forced herself to speak. "Are you going to kill me?" Her voice came out as a harsh whisper. The warrior's expression didn't change, but his eyes flicked to the fresh grave beneath her, then back to her face. When he spoke, his English was accented but clear. "Your husband's soldiers killed my wife, my children." His voice was deep, resonant, carrying the weight of mountains. "They burned our village while the men were away hunting. The women and children had no chance to run." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She'd heard the reports, a successful raid on a Comanche camp, they'd called it, a clean strike that would discourage further attacks. They hadn't mentioned women and children. "My name is Aiyana," the warrior continued, feeding another stick to the fire. "In your tongue it means eternal blossom. My wife chose it for me because she said I would outlive the seasons." His jaw tightened. She was wrong. The flames reflected in his eyes, and Sarah saw something there she recognized, the same hollow ache that had consumed her since James's death. It was the look of someone who'd lost everything that mattered, who'd been carved out from the inside and left empty. "Why are you here?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Aiyana's gaze never wavered. "To watch you die slowly, as my family did. To see if the white woman's tears taste the same as Comanche tears." He paused, poking at the fire with a stick. "But perhaps also to understand why your people's hatred runs so deep that they would slaughter sleeping children." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words settle over her like a shroud. When she opened them again, the warrior was still watching her, patient as stone. The fire had grown brighter as darkness crept across the prairie, and somewhere in the distance, wolves began their nightly chorus. "I didn't know," she whispered. "They said it was a military target. Warriors. They said what they needed to say," Aiyana interrupted, his voice carrying no anger, only weary acceptance. "Just as my war chief said your fort was full of demon soldiers who ate the hearts of Comanche children. We tell ourselves stories to make the killing easier." The rope around her wrists had begun to cut into her skin, and she could feel blood trickling down her fingers. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the growing realization of what her husband's final battle had truly cost. Not just his life, but the lives of innocents who'd never raised a weapon against anyone. "Will you stay until morning?" she asked, though she wasn't sure why it mattered. Aiyana nodded slowly. "I will stay until it is finished. Your husband's ghost will not walk alone tonight." As the fire crackled between them and the Texas stars emerged one by one overhead, Sarah McKenna began to understand that she and this Comanche warrior were bound by more than rope and revenge. They were bound by grief, by loss, and by the terrible knowledge that the dead on both sides would never truly rest until someone chose to break the endless cycle of blood. The fire had burned low, casting dancing shadows across the cemetery's weathered headstones. Sarah's head lolled forward, exhaustion and thirst pulling her toward unconsciousness, but the bite of rope against her raw wrists kept jerking her awake. Across the dying flames, Aiyana sat motionless as carved granite, his dark eyes reflecting the ember's glow. "Water," she croaked, her tongue thick and swollen. "Please." The warrior studied her for a long moment, then reached for a leather pouch at his side. He uncorked it and moved around the fire, kneeling beside her. The scent of sage and leather filled her nostrils as he tilted the pouch to her lips. The water was warm and tasted of buffalo hide, but it was the sweetest thing she'd ever known. "Not too much," he said, pulling it away as she tried to drink more. "You will be sick." Sarah nodded gratefully, feeling the precious moisture soak into her parched throat. "Why?" she whispered. Aiyana settled back by the fire, adding fresh wood to the flames. "A dying enemy deserves water. It is the way of things." But his eyes said something different, that perhaps she was no longer just an enemy to him. "Tell me about your family," Sarah said, surprising herself with the request. "Your wife." The warrior's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice soft as wind through prairie grass. "Her name was Nadua. She had hair like a raven's wing and eyes that held the wisdom of Grandmother Moon. She could track a deer through stone and heal a wound with just the touch of her hands." He paused, staring into the flames. "She was carrying our third child when your soldiers came." Sarah's heart clenched. "How old were your children?" Tokala was 7 summers, brave as a young wolf, always following the warriors, begging to carry their weapons. Aiyana's voice grew quieter. Aiyana was 5. She had her mother's laugh, like water running over stones. She would gather flowers for me each morning, always the yellow ones, because she said they matched the sun in my eyes. Tears traced paths through the dust on Sarah's cheeks. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Sorry does not bring back the dead," Aiyana replied, but there was no harshness in his voice. "Tell me of your husband. What manner of man was he?" Sarah closed her eyes, summoning James's face from memory. "He was gentle, kind. He joined the army because he believed he was protecting people, making the frontier safe for families to build their lives. He used to read to me from his books, Shakespeare, Dickens. He dreamed of returning to Boston someday, opening a law practice." She opened her eyes, meeting Aiyana's gaze. "He never spoke of killing women and children. If he had known, would he have refused the orders?" Aiyana asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them like smoke. Sarah wanted to say yes, but she remembered James's unwavering loyalty to duty, his belief that soldiers must follow orders without question. The truth was a stone in her throat. "I don't know," she admitted. "He was a good man, but he was also a soldier. He believed in the cause." "And what cause was that?" Sarah struggled to find words that had once seemed so clear. "Civilization, progress. Making the land safe for settlement, for farming, for—" She stopped, hearing how hollow the words sounded now. "For taking," Aiyana finished. "Your people speak of progress, but you measure it in how much you can possess. Land, cattle, gold. You see the earth as something to be owned, carved up, sold. To us the land is alive. It is mother, father, brother. You cannot own the wind or the rain, yet you try." A coyote howled in the distance, its voice lonely and wild. Sarah shifted, trying to ease the cramping in her legs. The ropes had cut deeper into her wrists, and she could smell the metallic scent of her own blood. "Your war chief," she said. "The one who ordered this. Does he have a family?" Aiyana nodded. 2 wives, 4 children. He lost his first son in a raid on a wagon train last spring. The boy was only 16, eager to prove himself as a warrior. He fed another stick to the fire. Chief Ironhawk's heart turned to stone that day. "He sees only enemies now, no longer people." "Like Sergeant Mills," Sarah murmured. "He lost his son in the same raid, I think. Tommy Mills, barely 18. After that, Mills started volunteering for every patrol, every strike against your people. He said he wouldn't rest until every Comanche was dead or driven from Texas. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the prairie. An owl called from somewhere in the darkness, and the fire crackled steadily between them. Sarah found herself studying Aiyana's face in the firelight, the strong jaw, the high cheekbones, the deep lines etched by sun and sorrow. He was younger than she'd first thought, probably close to her own age. In another time, another place, they might have been neighbors, friends even. "Do you believe in God?" she asked suddenly. Aiyana's eyes flicked to her. "The Great Spirit watches over all living things. He speaks through the wind, the thunder, the turning of the seasons. Your God, he lives in a wooden box, yes? In the buildings you construct?" "Some people think so," Sarah said. "But I always felt him more in the open sky, in the sound of rain on the roof, in the way James smiled when he thought no one was watching." She paused. "Do you think he's watching us now? Your Great Spirit and my God?" "Perhaps they are the same," Aiyana said quietly. "Perhaps they weep for what their children have become." A shooting star streaked across the sky above them, brilliant and brief. Sarah made a wish, though she wasn't sure what she was wishing for anymore. Not for rescue. She knew none was coming. Not for revenge. She'd seen where that led. Perhaps just for understanding, for some small mercy in the darkness. "I keep thinking about what you said," she whispered. "About stories we tell ourselves to make the killing easier. James told me once that Indians were savages, that they couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be civilized. But you speak better English than half the soldiers at the fort. You know Shakespeare. I heard you quote Hamlet earlier." "I lived with a missionary family for 3 years when I was young," Aiyana explained. "My parents sent me to learn the white man's ways, to understand your people. I read your books, learned your language, even attended your church services. I thought if I could bridge our worlds, perhaps there could be peace." "What changed your mind?" Aiyana's face hardened. "I watched that same missionary family cheer when the army brought back scalps from a Comanche village. Women's scalps, children's scalps. They called it God's justice." He stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of the firelight. "That night I understood that some people only see what they choose to see, and they choose to see us as animals." Sarah felt the weight of his words, the accumulated pain of countless betrayals and misunderstandings. The night air was growing colder, and she shivered in her thin dress. Without a word, Aiyana removed his buffalo robe and draped it around her shoulders, careful not to disturb the ropes. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked. He returned to his place by the fire, his eyes reflecting the flames. "Because Nadwa would have wanted me to. She believed that hatred was a poison that killed the one who carried it. She used to say that every act of kindness was a seed that might grow into something beautiful, even in the hardest ground." As the fire burned lower and the stars wheeled overhead, Sarah felt something shifting inside her chest. Not hope exactly, but a strange sort of peace. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring, but tonight, in this unlikely vigil, she and this Comanche warrior had found something neither had expected, a glimpse of the humanity that still existed beneath the weight of their people's hatred. The first pale light of dawn crept across the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Sarah had dozed fitfully through the night, her head resting against the rough wooden cross, but she jerked awake as the fire crackled and sparked. Aiyana was feeding fresh wood to the flames, his movements careful and deliberate. "The sun comes," he said without looking at her. "Soon your soldiers will wake. They will see the smoke and come to collect what remains." Sarah's mouth felt dry again, but not from thirst this time, from fear. The ropes around her wrists had worked loose during the night, and she could feel circulation returning to her hands. She flexed her fingers carefully, testing the bonds. With enough time and effort, she might be able to work free, but what then? She was miles from the fort, alone on the prairie with no horse, no weapon, no supplies. "What will you do?" she asked. Aiyana's dark eyes met hers across the fire. "I will do what I came to do. I will watch you die as my family died. It is justice." But his voice lacked conviction, and Sarah noticed his hand hadn't moved toward his weapons. Instead, he reached into a leather pouch and withdrew a piece of jerky, tearing it in half. He offered her a portion. "Eat," he said. "A warrior should not die on an empty stomach." Sarah accepted the dried meat, chewing slowly. It was tough and salty, flavored with sage and prairie smoke. "Is that what I am to you now? A warrior? You have faced death without begging, without breaking. You have honored your husband's memory with dignity. Yes, you are a warrior." The compliment from this enemy, this man who had every reason to hate her, touched something deep in Sarah's chest. She had spent her life trying to be the perfect officer's wife, proper and refined, never imagining she might possess the strength to face her own mortality with grace. "Aiyana," she said, and he looked up at the sound of his name. "What if we're both wrong?" "Wrong about what?" "About justice. About what our people need." She leaned forward as much as the ropes would allow. "Your children, my husband, they're gone. Nothing we do here will bring them back, but maybe we could stop others from dying." The warrior's expression hardened. "Pretty words, but your people will not listen. They see only savages who must be driven from their path. And your people see only invaders who must be destroyed," Sarah countered. "But you're listening to me now. I'm listening to you. If we can find common ground, others might too." Aiyana stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of the cemetery. The morning light revealed the harsh lines of his face, the weariness in his shoulders. "You speak of peace, but peace requires trust. How can there be trust when your soldiers slaughter sleeping children? When my warriors take scalps from innocent settlers?" "Because someone has to be willing to take the first step," Sarah said quietly. "Someone has to be brave enough to break the cycle. And you think that someone is us?" He turned back to her, and she saw something vulnerable in his eyes, a flicker of the same hope she was feeling. "I think we're the only ones who can. We've both lost everything that mattered. We have nothing left to lose except our hatred." She paused, testing the loosened rope again. "What if we chose something else?" The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted them. Aiyana's head snapped up, his hand moving instinctively to his tomahawk. In the distance, a dust cloud was rising from the direction of the fort, riders coming fast. "Soldiers," he said, his voice tight with tension. "They come for you." Sarah felt her heart racing. "How many?" Aiyana shaded his eyes, studying the approaching dust. "6, perhaps 7. They ride hard." He looked back at her, and she saw decision crystallizing in his expression. "There is still time. I can finish what I came to do before they arrive." "But you won't," Sarah said with sudden certainty. "Because you're not a murderer. You're a father who lost his children, a husband who lost his wife. You're a man who still believes in honor." The hoofbeats were getting closer now, and Sarah could make out individual riders. She recognized Sergeant Mills in the lead, his weathered face set in grim lines. Behind him rode 6 privates, all armed with carbines and pistols. Aiyana drew his knife, the blade catching the morning light. Sarah closed her eyes, bracing for the blow, but instead she felt the ropes around her wrists part. Her eyes snapped open to find the warrior cutting her bonds, his movements quick and efficient. "Why?" she gasped, rubbing her freed wrists. "Because Nadwa would have wanted me to choose mercy over vengeance," he said, "and because my children would be ashamed to see their father become the monster your people believe him to be." The soldiers were close enough now that Sarah could hear Mills shouting orders. "Spread out. Watch for an ambush." Aiyana pulled her to her feet, steadying her as blood rushed back into her legs. "Can you ride?" he asked urgently. Yes, I think so." "Then we go now." "We?" Sarah stared at him in confusion. "You spoke of breaking the cycle, of finding another way." Aiyana's eyes were bright with purpose. "I know where your people and mine might meet in safety. Neutral ground where words can be spoken without weapons. But it will require trust, complete trust." The soldiers were cresting the ridge now, their horses lathered with sweat. Mills raised his carbine, taking aim at Aiyana. "Step away from the woman, you red devil." "Choose," Aiyana said urgently, extending his hand to Sarah. "Stay and let them rescue you, or come with me and perhaps save both our peoples from more bloodshed." Sarah looked at the approaching soldiers, men she had known and trusted, then at the Comanche warrior who had shown her more humanity in one night than she had seen in months of frontier life. The choice should have been simple, obvious. But as she stared into Aiyana's eyes, she realized that simple choices were what had led to this cycle of violence in the first place. "Sarah," Mills called out, "get away from him." She reached out and took Aiyana's hand. "I choose trust," she said. In one fluid motion, Aiyana swept her up onto his paint horse, leaping up behind her. The animal responded to his touch like lightning, wheeling away from the cemetery toward the open prairie. Behind them, Mills's curse echoed across the morning air, followed by the sharp crack of rifle fire. "Where are we going?" Sarah shouted over the thunder of hoofbeats and the whistling of bullets. "To find an old friend," Aiyana replied, guiding the horse toward a line of hills in the distance. "A man who believes as we do that peace is possible. But first, we must survive the journey." As they rode hard across the Texas plains, Sarah felt the buffalo robe whipping around her shoulders, and the strong arms of her unlikely ally holding her steady. Behind them, the dust cloud of pursuit grew larger, and ahead lay only the vast uncertainty of the frontier. But for the first time in days, she felt something she had thought lost forever: hope. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist and revealing the long road ahead. It would be dangerous, perhaps impossible, but they would travel it together, a widow and a warrior bound by grief and united by the dream of something better than endless war. The paint horse's hooves pounded across the hardpan prairie, kicking up clouds of dust that hung in the still morning air. Sarah gripped the horse's mane, her body pressed against Aiyana's chest as they rode hard toward the distant hills. Behind them, the soldiers' pursuit grew closer, their carbines crackling like distant thunder. "There!" Aiyana pointed toward a cluster of red rocks jutting from the plains like broken teeth. "We make our stand." Sarah felt her stomach lurch as the horse changed direction, angling toward the rocky outcrop. "A stand? Against 7 armed soldiers?" "Sometimes the hunted must become the hunter," Aiyana replied, his voice steady despite the danger. "You're Sergeant Mills. He is angry, reckless. Anger makes men predictable." As they reached the rocks, Aiyana slid from the horse and pulled Sarah down after him. The paint disappeared into a narrow canyon between the stones, as if it had simply vanished. Sarah stared after it in amazement. "How did you—" "Later," Aiyana said, drawing his Winchester from its hide case. "Now we see what manner of men pursue us." They climbed swiftly through the maze of red sandstone, Aiyana moving with the sure-footed grace of a mountain cat. Sarah followed, her dress tearing on the rough stone but her footing steady. They reached a ledge overlooking the approach just as the soldiers thundered up to the base of the rocks. Mills dismounted first, his face flushed with rage and exertion. "Spread out! Check every crevice! I want that red bastard's scalp!" "Sergeant," called Private Henderson, a young man with worry lines creasing his forehead. "Maybe we should consider—" "Consider what?" Mills snarled. "That savage has taken Mrs. McKenna. God knows what he's done to her already." Sarah started to call out to tell them she was unharmed, but Aiyana's hand on her arm stopped her. "Wait," he whispered. "Listen." "Sir," Henderson persisted, "what if she went willingly? What if there's more to this than—" The crack of Mills's open palm across the private's face echoed off the rocks. "Don't you dare suggest such a thing. She's a lady, an officer's widow. She'd never—" "Not with one of them." From their hidden perch, Sarah watched the soldiers fan out among the rocks, their movements cautious but determined. She recognized each face, men who had served under her husband, who had eaten at her table, who had called her ma'am with respectful tips of their hats. Now they hunted her like a criminal. "Corporal Davis," Mills called to a grizzled veteran with a grey beard, "take Jackson and Martinez around to the north side. Henderson, you and Williams check the south approach. Thompson, you're with me." As the soldiers dispersed, Aiyana motioned for Sarah to follow him deeper into the rock formation. They moved silently through narrow passages worn smooth by centuries of wind and water, until they reached a hidden chamber where his horse waited patiently beside a small spring. "How did you know about this place?" Sarah asked, kneeling to cup the cool water in her hands. "My grandfather brought me here when I was a boy," Aiyana replied, checking his rifle. "He said it was a sacred place, where the spirits of the earth gather to speak. He also said it was a good place to hide from enemies." He smiled grimly. He was right about both. A shout echoed from outside. One of the soldiers had found their trail. "Over here! Fresh tracks!" Aiyana's expression grew serious. "We cannot stay, but to leave now means running into their guns." "What about your friend?" Sarah asked. "The one who might help us make peace?" 3 days' hard ride to the north. His name is Colonel Marcus Wade. He was cashiered from the army for speaking against the massacre at Sand Creek. Now he runs a trading post on the Canadian River, where white men and Indians do business in peace. Sarah knew the name. Wade had been a legend in the cavalry before his disgrace, a man who had fought Indians for 20 years before suddenly becoming their advocate. "They called him a traitor," she said quietly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps he simply grew tired of the killing." Aiyana peered through a gap in the rocks. "Your soldiers are getting closer. Soon they will find this place." "Then we fight," Sarah said, surprising herself with her resolve. Aiyana looked at her with something like admiration. "You would raise arms against your own people?" "They're not my people anymore," Sarah replied, remembering Mills's words, the hatred in his eyes. "Not if this is what they've become." The sound of boots on stone grew closer. Through the gap they could see Henderson and Williams working their way up the rocks, their carbines ready. Sarah watched the young private's face, saw the reluctance there, the moral struggle. "Henderson," she whispered to Aiyana. "He's different from the others." He questioned Mills. "You think he might listen to reason?" Before Sarah could answer, Henderson appeared at the entrance to their hiding place, his rifle lowered. His eyes widened when he saw them together, but he didn't raise his weapon. "Mrs. McKenna," he said quietly. "Are you all right? Are you hurt?" Sarah stepped forward, ignoring Aiyana's warning gesture. "I'm fine, Private. Better than fine. This man saved my life." Henderson's young face creased with confusion. "Saved your life?" "But the sergeant said—" "The sergeant is wrong," Sarah interrupted. "This warrior could have killed me, but he chose mercy instead. We're trying to find a way to stop the killing, to make peace between our peoples." "Peace?" Henderson's voice cracked. "After what they did to the lieutenant, after all the raids, the murders, after what we did to their women and children," Sarah said firmly. "This has to stop, Henderson. All of it." The private's rifle wavered, and Sarah saw the conflict in his eyes. Behind him, Williams appeared, his weapon trained on Aiyana. "Henderson, what are you doing?" Williams demanded. "Take the shot." Henderson looked from Sarah to Aiyana, then back to his fellow soldier. "I don't know, Williams. Something's not right here." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Sarah felt Aiyana tense beside her, ready to spring into action. Williams' finger tightened on his trigger. Then Henderson made his choice. He turned his rifle on Williams, his voice steady despite his pale face. "Lower your weapon, Williams. Mrs. McKenna is under my protection." "You're making a mistake," Williams warned, but he slowly lowered his carbine. "Maybe," Henderson agreed, "but I'd rather make the mistake of trusting than the mistake of more killing." Aiyana stepped forward, his hands visible and empty. "You are a wise man, soldier. What is your name?" "Henderson." "Private Tom Henderson, 3rd Cavalry. I am Aiyana of the Comanche. I give you my word that no harm will come to you or your friend if you let us pass." Henderson nodded slowly. "Where will you go?" "To find Colonel Wade," Sarah said, "to see if peace is possible." "Wade's alive?" Henderson's eyes widened. "I heard he was killed by renegades last year." "He lives," Aiyana confirmed, "and he has made a place where red man and white man can speak without weapons. But the journey is dangerous. Your sergeant will not give up easily." Henderson was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with his decision. Finally, he looked at Williams. "You didn't see anything here, understand?" Williams nodded reluctantly. "I understand. But Mills won't stop hunting them." "Then we'd better give them a chance," Henderson said. He turned to Aiyana. "There's a box canyon, about 2 miles north of here. Mills will search there next. If you can get past it, you'll have open ground to the Canadian River." "Why are you helping us?" Sarah asked. Henderson's young face was grave. "Because I'm tired of writing letters to dead men's families. Because maybe, just maybe, you can find a better way." He paused. "And because the lieutenant was a good man, he wouldn't want his wife to die for nothing." As they prepared to leave, Sarah touched Henderson's arm. "Thank you for choosing to trust." "Don't make me regret it," he replied. "And Mrs. McKenna, be careful. There are worse things than Sergeant Mills between here and the Canadian River." As they rode out through a hidden passage in the rocks, Sarah felt the weight of Henderson's trust, the fragile hope that peace might be possible. Behind them, the sounds of the search grew fainter, but she knew their real journey was just beginning. The frontier was vast and dangerous, and they had enemies on both sides of the conflict. But they also had something precious, the beginning of understanding between two peoples who had forgotten how to see each other as human. It was a small flame in the darkness, but it was enough to light their way forward. 2 days of hard riding had brought them to the Canadian River, its muddy waters cutting a brown ribbon through the red earth of the Texas Panhandle. Sarah's body ached from the constant motion, her hands raw from gripping the horse's mane, but her spirit felt lighter than it had since James's death. Beside her, Aiyana sat straight in the saddle, his dark eyes scanning the horizon for signs of danger. "There," he said, pointing toward a cluster of buildings on the far bank. "Colonel Wade's trading post." Sarah could see smoke rising from several chimneys and figures moving between the structures. What struck her most was the mixture. White men and Indians working side by side, loading wagons, tending horses, conducting business as if the war raging across the frontier didn't exist. "It's like another world," she murmured. "It is what the world could be," Aiyana replied, "if enough people chose to build bridges instead of walls." They forded the river at a shallow crossing. the paint horse picking its way carefully across the rocky bottom. As they approached the trading post, Sarah felt eyes upon them, curious, cautious, but not hostile. A tall man with graying hair and a military bearing emerged from the largest building, his hand resting casually on the butt of a pistol. "That's far enough," he called out in a voice accustomed to command. "State your business." Aiyana raised his hand in the universal sign of peace. "I seek Colonel Marcus Wade. I am Aiyana of the Comanche, and this is Sarah McKenna, widow of Lieutenant James McKenna." The man's weathered face creased in surprise. "I'm Wade, and you, Mrs. McKenna, are supposed to be dead, or worse." Sarah slid down from the horse, her legs unsteady after the long ride. "I was supposed to be, Colonel, but this man chose mercy over revenge. We've come seeking your help." Wade studied them both with the sharp eyes of a career soldier. Around them, the business of the trading post had come to a halt, white settlers and Indians alike watching the drama unfold. Sarah recognized the tension in the air. These people had built something precious here, and they wouldn't let it be destroyed by the conflicts of the outside world. "Inside," Wade said finally. "Both of you. We'll talk privately." The trading post's main building was spacious and well-appointed, with shelves lined with goods from both cultures, rifles and ammunition beside beadwork and pottery, bolts of cloth next to buffalo robes. Wade poured 3 glasses of whiskey and gestured for them to sit at a rough wooden table. "Start from the beginning," he said, "and don't leave anything out." Sarah and Aiyana took turns telling their story: the raid on the fort, the revenge killing at the cemetery, their night of shared grief and growing understanding, their flight from the pursuing soldiers. Wade listened without interruption, his expression growing more thoughtful with each detail. "So you believe peace is possible?" he said when they finished. "Despite everything that's happened, all the blood that's been spilled." "We have to believe it," Sarah replied. "The alternative is endless war, endless death. Our children, yours, theirs, they deserve better." Wade leaned back in his chair, studying them. "Do you know what happened to me at Sand Creek, Mrs. McKenna? Do you know why they drummed me out of the army?" Sarah shook her head, though she'd heard rumors. "I watched Colonel Chivington order the massacre of 300 peaceful Cheyenne and Arapaho. Men, women, children. It didn't matter. When I tried to stop it, when I ordered my men to stand down, Chivington had me arrested for insubordination." Wade's voice was flat, emotionless. "I spent 6 months in military prison while politicians called Chivington a hero. But you didn't give up," Aiyana observed. "You built this place. I built this place because I met an old Cheyenne chief named Black Kettle, the same chief whose people were slaughtered at Sand Creek. He was dying, and I was the one sent to negotiate with him. You know what he told me?" Wade's eyes grew distant. "He said that hatred was like a prairie fire. It consumed everything in its path until there was nothing left but ash. But he also said that sometimes, in the burned places, new grass grew stronger than before." A commotion outside interrupted them. Through the window, Sarah could see riders approaching, a dust cloud on the southern horizon. Her heart sank as she recognized the familiar blue uniforms. "Mills," she whispered. Wade stood, moving to the window. 8 men, they're riding hard." He turned back to Sarah and Aiyana. "They're not here for trade." "We'll go," Aiyana said, rising from his chair. "We won't bring trouble to your peaceful place." "Sit down," Wade commanded, his military bearing evident. "You came here seeking help, and by God you'll have it, but we're going to do this right." The colonel moved to a cabinet and withdrew a bugle, stepping onto the porch and sounding 3 long, clear notes. The effect was immediate. People emerged from buildings and gathered in the central courtyard, a mixed crowd of whites, Comanche, Kiowa, and Cherokee. Sarah was amazed to see how they stood together, united by something stronger than blood or skin color. "Friends," Wade called out, his voice carrying across the courtyard, "we have visitors coming. Soldiers who bring the old hatreds, the old wars. They seek to drag these 2 people back into the cycle of vengeance that has poisoned our land." "What say you?" A Comanche elder stepped forward, his gray braids adorned with eagle feathers. "They are under our protection, Colonel. The woman and the warrior have chosen the path of peace. They will not be taken." "Aye," called out a white settler with a thick Irish accent. "We've all lost enough to the killing. Time to try something different." More voices joined in, a chorus of agreement from people who had chosen to build something new in the wilderness. Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes as she realized what was happening. These strangers were willing to risk everything to protect the fragile hope she and Aiyana represented. Mills and his men thundered into the courtyard, their horses lathered with sweat and their faces grim with determination. The sergeant's eyes swept the crowd until they found Sarah standing beside Wade on the porch. "Mrs. McKenna!" Mills called out. "Step away from those people. You're coming back to the fort where you belong." Sarah moved forward, her voice steady and clear. "I belong where I choose to belong, Sergeant, and I choose to stay here. You don't know what you're saying." Mills dismounted, his hand on his pistol. "That savage has addled your mind. You're coming with us." "She's under my protection," Wade said calmly, "and the protection of everyone here. You have no authority in this place." Mills's face flushed red with anger. "You're a traitor, Wade. A disgrace to the uniform, and these people—" He gestured at the mixed crowd. "They're nothing but Indian lovers and cowards." The insult hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Sarah felt the crowd tense, hands moving toward weapons. One wrong word, one hasty action, and the peace of this place would be shattered forever. Then Aiyana stepped forward, his hands empty and visible. "Sergeant Mills," he said, his voice carrying the dignity of his ancestors, "I am the one you seek. I am the one who took your friend's wife. If you wish justice, then face me alone. But leave these people in peace." Mills drew his pistol, his eyes wild with rage. "Justice, I'll give you justice, you murdering—" "Stop!" The voice was quiet, but carried absolute authority. Private Henderson emerged from behind the other soldiers, his own weapon drawn and trained on his sergeant. "That's enough, Mills." "Henderson!" Mills snarled. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done days ago," Henderson replied, "standing up to a man who's forgotten what honor means." He looked around at the assembled crowd, his young face grave. "These people have found a way to live in peace. Maybe it's time we learn from them instead of trying to destroy them." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Sarah held her breath, watching Mills's finger tighten on his trigger. Then slowly the other soldiers began to lower their weapons. One by one they chose Henderson's path over Mills's hatred. Seeing himself abandoned, Mills holstered his pistol with a curse. "This isn't over," he spat. "The army will hear about this. All of you." "Let them hear," Wade replied. "Let them hear that there's a place where the old wars don't have to matter, where people can choose peace over revenge." As Mills and his remaining loyal soldiers rode away, the crowd slowly dispersed, returning to their daily lives. Sarah felt Aiyana's hand on her shoulder, solid and reassuring. "It's not the end," she said quietly. "There will be others like Mills, people who profit from the hatred." "Perhaps," Aiyana agreed, "but there will also be others like Henderson, like these people here, and each person who chooses peace over war makes the next choice easier." Wade joined them on the porch, a slight smile creasing his weathered features. "So, Mrs. McKenna, what will you do now? You can't go back to your old life." Sarah looked out at the trading post, at the remarkable community Wade had built, at the evidence that peace was not just possible but real. Then she looked at Aiyana, this warrior who had become her friend, her partner in hope. "I think," she said slowly, "I'll help you build bridges, Colonel. As many as we can wherever they're needed." Aiyana nodded, his dark eyes bright with purpose. "The path forward is long and difficult, but we have taken the first steps." As the sun set over the Canadian River, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since James's death, the certainty that her life had meaning, that she was part of something larger than her own grief. The frontier was still dangerous, the conflicts far from over, but here in this unlikely place with these unlikely allies, she had found proof that the human heart was stronger than hatred. The war between their peoples would continue, but it would not be endless, because somewhere in the vast wilderness of the American frontier, a widow and a warrior had chosen trust over vengeance, and in doing so had lit a flame that no amount of darkness could extinguish. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to build understanding between divided peoples, but tonight, as the stars emerged one by one overhead, peace was possible, and that was enough.